Hello and welcome to the channel of Anantam IAS English. My name is Vaibhav Mishra and I am faculty for Polity and Governance as well as I teach current affairs. So as you have been following our current affairs program since last 4 weeks, we go live thrice every week and we make a clear cut distinction. We take up those articles which involve a faculty intervention for explanation. Otherwise you can just go to our Anantam IAS website and you can read the daily current affairs articles. We explain the context. We also give you an anchor as to why this particular news article is important, by explaining the UPSC relevance, by showing you the previous year questions from prelims and mains as the case may be. And that's how we explain all the articles to the depth that is appropriate for covering that topic. You know that the preparation for UPSC is an integrated whole. It certainly cannot be divided into specifically prelim centric and specifically main centric preparation or information, except barring for very few topics. That's what we do. And so you can see all the articles have been explained there. As far as this live is concerned, we have chosen five very important topics to be covered, which definitely needs a little bit of analytics, which definitely needs a kind of explanation. The first article that we have chosen to cover sort of happens to be the speech made by Prime Minister Modi and his strong pitch for self-reliance. Now, why have we taken this topic for the discussion, especially as article number 1, which happens to be the most important article? Self reliance has generally been understood as an antiquated, very old socialist era policy of the Indian state and other post colonial states, the states which came into existence after the end of the colonialism, to sort of, make themselves in sort of really independent, to break the shackles of colonial hold over their economics. You know that one of the ways through which imperialism started was through forming colonies and consolidating their economic control over the colonial economies. Now the question is, there are different questions that arise because of the recent push by the Prime Minister Modi with respect to self-reliance. Number one is to understand what self-reliance really is. What do we understand by self-reliance? What does it mean? Why did we adopt self-reliance in immediately after independence? In what form or through what policies the government of India ensured self-reliance? What were its merits and what were its demerits? So, for instance, do you really think that the self reliance policy that India followed through was clearly beneficial, or did it have downsides and upsides? It had both. Then why did we actually shun self-reliance in LPG era? Why did we do it after 1991? Why did we took away the emphasis from the self-reliance? Because we surely did take our eyes away from self-reliance when we decided to integrate with the world in the flow of globalization. And if that was the case, suddenly why in last 2 3 years self-reliance, Atmanirbhar Bharat, has become sort of a central economic theme for the government of India. So let's start by understanding what self-reliance means. Obviously, this, if you understand English, if you speak English, this is not something which is very difficult or not an obscure word to be understood. Self-reliance clearly means uh, independence, a sort of reduction of dependence on foreign players. And this dependence is mainly centered around economy, but it is extended to technology as well. It is just not economy or technology, it extends to security, for example, defense. The idea is that the less you are dependent on foreign countries for your economic needs, for your energy needs, for your defense needs, for your technological needs, the more autonomous you will be, and you will be in a better situation to protect your sovereignty. It does not clearly indicates isolation, but it has some element of isolation, but largely it focuses on the indigenous capability of a nation state to provide for all the requirements that I have written over here. So you can see that immediately when India got independence, just after India got independence in 1947, and when India wrote the constitution in 1950, and we had first popularly elected government, this self reliance was given a term that became known as import substituting industrialization, or ISI. By ISI, I do not mean the ISI that usually strikes our mind. It is a very different kind of ISI, which basically means state led import substitution, or import substituting industrialization. We have to industrialize. That is non compromisable. We have to lay emphasis on manufacturing. Everyone understood that was the way to provide for a secured employment for such a vast agricultural dependent population. But that industrialization should be guided in the direction of import substitution. So, identify all the goods and services for which India is dependent on foreign countries, make a list of it, and then make sure that the country starts producing most of that. Now, why was it state led? State led. Why wasn't it private sector or private capital led? Is because you can understand a post colonial country, a country which has been colonized by imperial power for 200 years, is deprived of human capital, is deprived of financial capital. And so the private sector in a country like India, in the backdrop of independence, would not have people with so much of wealth to take the risk of capital intensive goods and services. For example, electricity generation. For example, capital goods production. And because the private sector will not have the capacity to take on this large scale manufacturing, which requires heavy expenditure to begin even the first production, the state took the responsibility, took the burden, took the onus on itself to lead this phase of industrialization. So, as the first step of import substituting industrialization, what the government of India did was to initiate the era of public sector undertakings, PSUs. State at the commanding heights of economy. What are the commanding heights of economy? Bread manufacturing? No. It is heavy electrical. It is hydro power production. It is electricity distribution and transmission. These are the commanding heights which require a lot of specialization, technology, and they at the same time are very capital intense. Then, while the PSUs will take time to produce the goods which country right now or at that point of time imported, how will you discourage imports? What you do along with PSUs, you will use tariff and non-tariff barriers. Tariff and non-tariff barriers. What are barriers to the trade? Barriers to the trade are the instruments which discourage trade. How can you discourage trade? You can specify quota, let's say of 100 cars every year. More than that, import is not allowed. So import of more than 100 cars is not allowed, or for every import you need a license. So that makes import difficult, discouraging import. So that these are called non-tariff barriers. But customs duty is a tariff barrier where a fixed proportion of the value of the product has to be paid extra on top of the price, and making it expensive and making it uncompetitive in the domestic scenario. So you can see these were the two basic tools sort of import substituting industrialization. Apart from that, we were heavily dependent on import as far as our food security was concerned. And so, since the third plan, the focus was also on making India self reliant on food production, which ultimately culminated in the form of Green Revolution. Now, this is what the major policy of the state was with respect to the self reliance. Because, as Nehru had famously quoted, if you go to the article on IS Anantam website, we have given you a link to that speech of Nehru, where Nehru famously remarked that we don't want to be slaves again. And if the Western world, especially the Britain, would continue such a capital and technological control on India, it's a matter of time that we will again become slaves of the Western world. And so the idea was to avoid becoming slaves of the Western world. And so uh, now we have an advantage of hindsight, because we have seen that these policies were in effect for around 30, 40 years. There are both good as well as bad sides to the self reliance strategy that was followed in the immediate aftermath of the independence. As far as the good things are concerned, there are a lot of good things that you can clearly see emerged from the self reliance policy of the government of India. No doubt, India, as far as the heavy technological production is concerned, for example, steel, India had within 20 years world class steel manufacturing. For example, if you have gone through the map locations, Bhilai, Bokaro steel plants, these were globally competitive public sector undertakings which were producing the world's best quality steel. At the same time, India was able to establish other famous PSUs like BHEL, Bharat Heavy Electrical Limited. India was able to produce, so this is Steel Authority of India Limited, SAIL. Then you have Nuclear Power Corporation of India Limited. So you had Hydropower, NHPC. These were sort of PSUs which within a very very short span of time were able to yield results for India. They generated employment in India's hinterland. They had a multiplier effect at the place where they were opened. And at the same time, the core or the crux is that India was not import dependent because of bhel, because bhel was now producing what was earlier imported, heavy electrical equipments which were technologically very very advanced. In the matters of strategic sectors, for example, defense, we had generated DRDO, which enabled us to conduct first nuclear test at Pokhran 1, which sort of ushered a new era in India's strategic autonomy and projected India to a very different pedestal. Beyond that, it became very difficult for any country to threaten India's security. So DRDO yielded results initially, and very very closely followed by another marvelous PSU, ISRO, Indian Space Research Organization, ISRO, which by 1980s had developed the launch vehicles. First, the Polar Satellite Launch Vehicle PSLV, which are lighter ones which can carry only a smaller load, and pretty soon, within 20 years, followed by Geosynchronous Launch Vehicle, which can lift off very, very heavy payload and can project satellites and other items into geosynchronous orbit, which is way distant from Earth. And this was all achieved through the policy of import substituting industrialization under the PSU regime. At the same time, India pretty soon achieved food security. Rapid increase in the food production was achieved. India became food sufficient, uh, and India did not have to worry about PL40 program or any other foreign funds or sources of food for its day-to-day feeding needs. So these are the good sides, but that does not mean that import substituting industrialization policy had no demerits. In fact, it must have had a lot of significant demerits, because of which we had to shun this idea. And obviously, there are countless many problems that we had to face as a result of import substituting industrialization. Number one, because we did not unleash the private entrepreneurial capital, we kept it under the shackles of state. India observed very low growth. I hope the red ink on the blackboard is visible, although it is not the best combination, but I hope it is visible to all of you. Should I use the red ink? Okay. Now, low growth. So, the growth, what do we mean by low growth? Everything is very comparative. You cannot have anything in isolation. During that period, when India was following import substituting industrialization, the average growth rate India observed was 3% plus minus 1% per annum. You are very habitual of thinking anything below 7 is very low. Think about that time when India was observing 3%. This is the overall GDP growth. If you look at the per capita income, it grew on an average pace of 1% per annum, which was one of the lowest in the least developing economies or developing countries. To the extent that Pakistan was observing 7 to 8% of per annum growth. It was known as Asian Tigers because the entire world was betting on Pakistan that it will be the success that we are waiting for in South Asia. No one was looking with hope as far as Indian economy was concerned. That was the situation. India was pejoratively, derogatorily known as Hindu growth rate country. That there is a peculiar problem with Hindu society because of the Hindu majority country, that it is very difficult for such a diverse nation to observe growth that could be higher than uh, 2 or 3%. This is the fate that India has been sealed into, and this is what it has to bear for a very long time to come. But this was not the only problem. Because you imposed such a high tariff and non tariff trade barriers on import, a particular problem with the protectionist economies across the globe is that protectionist economies, in trying to incentivize domestic goods and services on their production and sale, uh, they make the domestic goods and services extremely inefficient because they don't have to worry about competition. Now, imagine if in India the only car manufacturers that were allowed were Tata and Mahindra, and they were absolutely assured that there will be no competition from any foreign manufacturers. They will they will not be forced to innovate. They will not be forced to cut down the prices. It's only when you allow Toyota to exist in the market. It's only because you allow Hyundai, you allow uh, MG, you allow different foreign brands, that now even the domestic companies are not only forced to innovate, but it leads to the better goods and services offered to the consumers. So the protectionist policies hurt both the consumers as well as the producers. It hurts the consumer because it forces them to choose bad quality of goods, bad quality goods and services. At the same time, it is bad for the consumer, it is bad for the industry because industry is not forced to innovate because they are not worried about any kind of threat. At the same time, because we were ushering in the era of license raj, the the allocation of the resources in the economy, which is also the part of your syllabus, in the economy, were not being driven by the fundamental law of economics, demand and supply, but it was being driven by bureaucracy. So, bureaucracy would determine the location of industries according to their own understanding of where the industry is needed. That led to corruption, red tapeism. Because if you will have to seek the permission of a particular bureaucrat for opening up a factory as well as shutting down the factory, for hiring people, for firing people, obviously it breeds corruption, and India became one of the most corrupt electoral democracy across the globe. These PSUs, while they served a lot of purpose, most of them, in fact, majority of them became a loss making ventures, because if your private money is not involved and if is headed by assured salaried employees of the government of India, they wouldn't care less about the losses or the profit. So they became loss making ventures. Obviously, it was reflected in India's fiscal deficit. At that point of time, the Indian government did not have a lot of understanding of how these monetary policies and fiscal policies interact with each other. And on various occasions, the RBI had to print more money, which increased the money supply. But there was no concomitant increase in the production of goods and services. And in that kind of situation, what happens is inflation. And so you can see that's why within 2-3 decades, an understanding developed in India's policymakers and decision makers that this is not a way to go about, and we slowly and gradually need to change this policy of self-reliance. And it is not, we famously know 1991 as that moment where the government of India decided on one fine day that this is it, we are now going to carry out reforms. In fact, the consensus around reforms uh, had been in conversation from mid 1980s. In fact, there were a lot of reforms which were carried out in the late 1980s as well, which are obscured by 1991 because 1991 reforms were massive. So obviously, all of us, even people who have just started uh, their preparation for UPSC, they know that obviously the problems because of the problems of payment, balance of payment crisis, we had to go to IMF, and IMF put conditions for bailout as a bailout package, that if you carry out these sort of reforms, we will extend the loan, otherwise we will not. This is one of the reasons, which is the final nail in the coffin. But there were a sequence of events which all of them combined together coincidentally, all of them overlapped in 1990 and 1991. Number one can be the growth that was shown in North Korea, that was shown in China, that was shown in Taiwan. Countries which sort of became independent at the same time but were observing 10 to 12% annual growth rate year on year. By 1991, 10 years of economic reforms in China under Deng Xiaoping had already made it clear that what is the power of private capital. So that was obviously very, very clear. So the comparison among the policymakers had already started happening in the late 90s. So they were very clear that probably we are doing something wrong. At the same time, during the same period, the USSR, which has epitomized the sort of policies which was the source, motivation, inspiration for the kind of economic policies that we had been following, itself collapsed. And so, with its collapse, went the idea of the social control over economic and material resources of the society. That if that idea was epitomized by a state, itself collapsed, we should not probably replicate or try to replicate that idea here. At the same time, India's internal politics had changed from a single party majority Congress system, where Congress maintained power at the center as well as in the majority of the states in 1960s and 70s, to late 80s, where it became impossible for any single party to form the government, and that lasted until 2014. Now, this is called regionalization of Indian politics, where a lot of regional parties emerged not only at the state level, but it became impossible even at the center level to form the government without their support. Now, when you have this kind of a system where everything is controlled by the central government, allocation of the resources are controlled by the central government, As long as you have the same party in the state, there is no problem. But if you have different political parties at the state, they would want to exercise autonomy, and this kind of centralized allocation of the resources would come in the way of autonomy of the states. And so the federalization of Indian politics, you can say, became one more reason. So there are multiple reasons as to why in 1991 budget, PV Narasimha Rao, uh, Manmohan Singh, they presented that now we are going to radically change India's economy, which later on came to be known as LPG, liberalization, which means it consisted of very wide set of reforms, uh, deregulating the industrial sector, changing the forex. India went into managed floating regime, uh, opening India for foreign global capital, then ushering in current account convertibility, releasing the limits for capital account convertibility. A lot of the reforms were carried out. That is not the topic of today's discussion, but nonetheless, LPG were brought. Now, the question and the reason as to why we have chosen to discuss this topic is when you go for LPG, you clearly indicate your willingness to open up your economy. When India became liberalized, what does liberal means? Liberal means you don't put restrictions. Now, how will you carry out self reliance without putting restrictions? So isn't it uh, mm, opposite to what has been the norm for Indian economy? There are multiple reasons for uh, why we have gone through, or why we are now talking about self reliance again, just like we were talking about self reliance in 1950s and 60s. There is no doubt that in last 30-35 years, India has reaped a lot of economic benefits. India's GDP growth rate has been on an average 6 to 8%. India has become a global supplier, and India has become the most competitive supplier of software services, pharmaceuticals, in some sectors, automobiles, two wheelers, all of that. Gems and jewelry business has boomed in India. In diamond polishing, India is the market leader. There are a lot of good things that have happened after LPG. But despite that, the problems of LPG and the downside of LPG is also becoming increasingly clear, and there are more than many reasons that you can think about as to why self reliance as a strategy is more relevant now. To begin with the growth came the purchasing power. And what happened as a result of purchasing power is that Indian consumer was willing to spend more money. While Indian consumer was willing to spend more money, Indian suppliers did not have those products to offer, especially electronic goods. And so you can see in last 15 to 20 years, we have developed mm, very humongous trade deficit with China. So you can say the China problem, because the Indian manufacturer, because of the 30-40 years of import substituting industrialization, did not have the capacity to counter China. And that's when we became increasingly entrenched with, or we became dependent. And so it, just after independence, we were dependent on Western world. Now we have created a sort of new dependency on China, especially for technology, electronics, and chip manufacturing. Chip manufacturing is from Taiwan. At the same time, while we praise DRDO for the defense indigenization initially, but in the same period, India became the largest defense importer across the globe. So this is world number one, and probably this is not the number one rank that we should feel very proud about. So these are the long term background problems, but some escalation has happened in last 3 to 4 years, which has made us realize deeply about the rightfulness of self reliance as a policy. For example, what happened in COVID? COVID made us realize that how integrated global supply chains compromise our security on anything, medical security, internal security, everything. Take the example of pharmaceutical. We are the world's largest generic medicine manufacturers, the kind of medicines on which patent has expired and now everyone has the right to start the production. We forgot that the pharmaceuticals requires APIs for their manufacturing. China was the largest producer of API and the supplier of API to India. So when India produces the generic medicine, 80% of the value is imported from China. And during COVID lockdown, those Chinese factories shut down. Indian pharmaceutical had to shut down not because of Indian lockdown but because of Chinese lockdown. And similar is the case with every kind of manufacturing, where the entire process of manufacturing could be scattered around 8 to 9 countries. For example, in mobile phones, if Taiwan shuts down today, globally there will be a problem with respect to anything where chips are being used. And that's the problem. The integrated global supply chain has created this kind of a complex problem where shut shut down anywhere, problem anywhere is problem everywhere. That's the problem that globally we see happening throughout. At the same time, world has never been so tumultuous. World has never been so unstable, and this geopolitics, especially what has happened in last 1 month because of Trump and Trump's persistence on India related to India Russia oil purchase, has made us even more realize, because of heavy dependence of India, US happens to be the largest export market for most of India's goods and services, and in that kind of situation US imposing tariff is a big problem. So these geopolitical tensions, for example, US Russia, Ukraine Russia, what's happening in Middle East between Israel and Iran, everywhere you see problems which could have ramifications or manifestation on Indian energy and economic security. We do not want that to happen. At the same time, what we have realized is that for an economy to grow, so these are like situational necessities, these are the situational needs as to why you would want self reliance, but there is an intrinsic value to be gained from a very very simple fact that if you focus and develop your expertise in any of the fields of production, then you have something to offer for the global community, and that's probably the best strategy to integrate in the global supply chain. It is the most reliable strategy for economic growth. So that can be most well demonstrated by software industries. The most value addition into our economy over the period of last 30-35 years has been added by software and service economy, where India so far has been, we don't know as to in the coming evolution or changes in the technology how it will change, but and that has been a purely indigenous without any import. So it is the most safe and secure strategy for economic growth, and that is clearly reflected in the policies of the government of India. And just the nomenclature of the policy, Atmanirbhar Bharat, self-reliance translates into Atmanirbhar, under which government has initiated PLI scheme, production link incentive. Government has initiated vocal for local scheme, and there are different kinds of schemes that the government of India has indeed initiated. So you can go to the IAS Anantam website and read about this article. This is a very very good discussion on our website already that you can see. All right. Okay. So now let's now move on to the next topic for discussion, which deals with a disaster that we seem to be facing probably every now and then, especially just one second. Yes, uh, that is cloudburst, and the name itself clearly indicates that some kind of cloud has burst. So you can see that at least 40 people were feared dead and more than 100 missing after a flash flood triggered by cloudburst. So flash flood is a different disaster, cloudburst is a different disaster. We have seen that flash flood can have multiple causes. One of them was cloudburst, and that is what has happened in Kishtwar uh, village in Kishtwar district. So what is flash flood? What is a cloudburst? And how to approach this? Why you should be concerned about this topic can be most clearly indicated. You go to any previous year question of GS paper 3, you will see one question on disaster and disaster management. You can go to the GS paper 3 syllabus, it says disaster and disaster management as a line in the syllabus, which is clearly reflected in the PYQs. So all those people who follow PYQ, they know it. Now, what is a cloud burst? Is it a cloud bursting, like destroying itself into multiple pieces, and that's when you get the cloud burst? Because this is what the name suggests. It is not like that. Obviously, the nomenclature is a misnomer. It does not indicate the real scenario because it treats cloud as like a bubble which can burst. No, it is not, never like that. In fact, a cloud is nothing but the air parcel which has reached saturation, its dew point, and that's when the holding capacity of the air for vapor is breached, and then air cannot accommodate any more water vapor, and so any water vapor beyond that has to be condensed in the form of rainfall. So that is what that is how cloud and rains operate. But general cloud leading to rain is very different from a phenomenon that is known as cloudburst, which IMD defines as a very heavy rainfall in a very small period of time. So if you look at IMD's definition, 10 centimeter of rainfall within 1 hour in any station created by IMD responsible for reporting the disaster is known as cloudburst. Now, just to give you a context, just to give you just a simple context, average rainfall throughout the year in areas like Jammu Kashmir is around 30 to 40 centimeter. In Rajasthan, it is on an average 50 centimeter. In Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, it is around 100 and 110, 120 centimeter. So you can see that one 20%, 25% of the rainfall throughout the year happening within 1 hour is a massive rainfall. And if such a vast amount of rainfall pours down at a particular area, the most of the regions in our country do not have the drainage to give a safe passage to this extra water, and this is what results in flood, correct, which is different from normal riverine flood, and that is why it is more common in Himalayan region and Western Ghats. Okay, so what causes such a massive amount of rain pouring down? What causes such torrential rainfall? There can be multiple reasons for that. So generally, you know that one of the factors because of which the rain occurs is orographic. Oro means height, orographic. A parcel of air, like a cloud, meeting a terrestrial barrier, elevating itself into height. And as you elevate in height, you go through adiabatic cooling, which means that the parcel of the air cools itself without any exchange from the surrounding areas. And so the dew point within the cloud is reached, and that's when the water vapor drops in the form of rainfall. So that is one way. That is usually how the rainfall happens, and that is why you have very high rainfall towards the west of the Western Ghats and towards the northeast because of the orographic barriers. So this is the normal rainfall. But imagine if this entire rise of the cloud is done in a very short span of time. then obviously the dew point will be achieved very early on, and the rainfall will happen in a very short period of time. So any gust of wind which propels a cloud in a very rapid manner upside the mountain areas has the tendency to cause cloud burst. But apart from that, any kind of atmospheric instability. So you know that as you go up the air, the temperature declines, which means that the colder parcel of air is situated above warmer and less dense. And this is an unstable situation. This generally happens. Sometimes we have very stable situations in the atmosphere, which is known as temperature inversion. Now, there can be various reasons because of which atmospheric instability might arise. For example, formation of fronts forces the warm current to rise up the cold current, something like this. And in the short span of time, the warm current rises up the cold current and can give rise to huge or massive amounts of rainfall in a very short period of time. So if you're done with the basics of geography, it will not be very difficult task for you to understand all these phenomena. So you can see that the cloud burst can be caused mainly because of these two reasons. The question is, since last 1.5 months, we have observed increasing frequency of the cloud burst. Now, why the frequency of the cloud burst is increasing on a day to day basis is a question that we should be bothered about. It's not like cloud bursts have been discovered lately. The cloud burst, however, have increased in the frequency of late. Now, one of the reasons that experts say is the increase in the temperature because of the global warming. Now, how does increasing temperature becomes the cause of increasing frequency for the cloud burst? So, you know that the warmer air has more capacity to hold water. Colder air has less capacity to hold water. Now, if the temperature itself becomes high, the capacity of the air to hold water becomes high, and when that parcel of air will rise the same altitude, will pour down more rain. So higher temperature uh, has become one of the most important reasons. At the same time, because of the climate change, we have seen that how monsoon patterns are changing. There is a drastic change in the monsoon pattern that we observe as a result of climate change and global warming, because now we have longer dry periods and very short intense spell of heavy rainfall, something that was earlier known as break in the monsoon. Now the breaks have become longer, followed by very intense waves of rainfall. That was not the case earlier. There were periods of slow and steady rainfall, then some break, then slow and steady rainfall. Now you have a dry period of 15-20 days, then 2-3 days of very intensive rainfall. Now when you have such a phenomena, obviously the cloud burst will become very probable and frequent. At the same time, if you know that the cloud formation requires a nuclei, particulate matters suspended in the air, which becomes the seed for cloud, around which initial ice nuclei or the crystals are formed, and on top of that, water vapor is collected. Because of the increasing pollution, the amount of the particulate matter size 10, 2.5 have drastically increased, supplying and acting as more and more number of nuclei around which the cloud can form. So you can see that these are the reasons because of which we have rapid increase in the cloud burst frequency across the globe. So obviously you can see that just like if you go all these things that I am uh, explaining as this, you can go to the website and you can read a beautifully written article on cloudburst. Just one moment. Yes, so you can see that this is a hand drawn diagram by our team member, this is what I just explained. Impacts of cloudburst, flash floods, landslides, mudslides. This is a case study from Uttarakhand. Measures to mitigate destruction. While cloudbursts cannot be prevented, their destructive impact can be reduced. Early warning systems, deployment of Doppler radars. Doppler radars are the ones which can clearly predict the location of the cloud formation and give us early warning. Disaster resilient infrastructure, infrastructure which is resilient to most forms of disasters. So we need to make our infrastructure immune to earthquakes. So I'm talking about Himalayan region, as well as cloudburst and floods. Afforestation, deforestation has become one of the important causes, most important causes for flash floods and cloudburst. Is it's very simple. The same amount of water going into an area which is deforested as opposed to an area which has a lot of forest will result into a very different situation, because when you do not have the trees which have roots to bind the soil, the same amount of water will wash away a lot of soil, especially the topsoil, which will make the water slow, making the exit of the water very difficult, delaying the discharge, and hence adding on to the flood situation. So these are the way forward that you can go and read on the website. Next has been the highlighting part of the last month, and I have seen a lot of discussion in my family group, in my society's WhatsApp group, everywhere. People have just taken clear cut sides about. Just one second. Yeah. So it's about the Supreme Court's order given by a division bench to take away all the stray dogs from the streets in Delhi NCR region. And this has been a very drastic step taken by Supreme Court for the protection of human public health and human safety. Now, if you ask me, in this particular article, probably we will still to see what can be the dimensions which will emerge, because this has been challenged again, and it is right now under the review of the Supreme Court, and let's see what decision is given, or maybe Supreme Court will change its decision, or we don't know what will happen. But as of now, the first thing is to understand how Supreme Court was able to legally justify this decision. What were the legal antecedents or legal justifications? Because the Constitution has not said under any article that there should not be any street animals. So Supreme Court must root its decision in the Constitution and in law. That is number one. Following the order, there were two sides in civic society. One that wholeheartedly welcomed this decision, sort of people who care about human safety more than the animal safety, and then the people who love animals and care for them, and then they sort of criticize this decision and sort of uh, suggesting that this decision is not going to have any impact. That is the discourse that we have to understand. Following that, we will have to see some broader trends with respect to executive judicial relationship, with respect to judicial overreach. Whether this could be a case for judicial overreach, we'll have to see that. Now, when you look at the Supreme Court judgment, the link to which has been provided on IAS Anantam website in the same article where we have discussed this in detail, Supreme Court was perturbed and moved by the increasing instances of dog bites uh, in Delhi NCR region, and increasing deaths related to rabies across the country, mainly because of unvaccinated stray dogs in the country. With the population has proliferated to the extent that, according to different estimates, there are around 6 to 10 lakh. So minimum is 6 lakh street dogs in Delhi right now. Uh, Obviously, when you have street dogs, all of us have faced that we do not feel secure, especially during night time when we have to go and we are not in a four wheeler. If we are walking pedestrian, or if we are going somewhere on two wheeler, we see that we are often followed, and that too in some very rude ways, by the dogs. That compromises our right to movement in the country, because right to movement can be reasonably restricted only on two grounds that are provided under article 19 clause 4. One is for the protection in the interest of in public interest, and the second one is for the protection of the scheduled tribes. Apart from that, state cannot put any restriction on our movement. The dogs in India have become a restriction on our right to movement. So you can see that that is the number one article that was used by the Supreme Court. The second one that the Supreme Court has quoted in the judgment is article number 47, which happens to be unenforceable section of the Constitution of India, where it shall be the responsibility of the state to protect public health, take care of the nutrition, and not being able to take care of the stray dogs compromises on article 47. So you can see that there is a harmony that is being developed by the Supreme Court over here. So this is the constitutional provision when it comes to the dog stray dog problem. But just not the constitution that completes the law, it is also the laws and the executive orders. So in the laws we have Prevention of Cruelty Towards Animal Act, PCA, which says that the animals will not be treated cruelly in our country. But there is a minor exemption that has been given in that act. Only when a particular animal or a group of animals threaten human safety and security. So that is an exemption that has been given for the protection of human safety. A particular animal on a case to case basis can be eliminated. So for example, we say ye kutta pagal ho gaya, a dog has become mad, which means that probably that relates to rabies taking its peak, or any other disease. Dog starts biting people randomly, and so then the law provides a provision where the dog can be eliminated by some like active euthanasia, by some injecting drugs which can very slowly kill the animal. But apart from that, recently in 2023, ministry released Animal Birth Control Rules 2002, which did two things. Number one is that it said that no stray dogs or stray animals will be hurt in India. In order to control their population, the first thing that you have to do is to vaccinate them, and you have to make them infertile, and then you have to release them into open. Because if a dog is vaccinated, and if the dog has been made infertile or the dog has been sterilized, it has no threat to human safety and security, and it should be released back to the same location from where it was picked up, because that is the location where the dog knows exactly where to find the food from. So it is important for its survival. Now this ABC rule 2023, this was challenged in Supreme Court, and last year, ironically, Supreme Court upheld the ABC rule 2023. And certainly Supreme Court says that all the stray dogs from Delhi and within Delhi NCR regions have to be picked up, and it is just not a plain and simple order. It contains within itself a lot of other mandatory objectives to be achieved by the central government, by the Delhi government, in case of Delhi NCR region, for which we have made a mind map. I want you to read that and remember that what Supreme Court has obligated on the Delhi government. Let's read that. Let's go back to the article quickly. So look at this. The comprehensive stray dog management plan. By the way, this is not a plan that has been made by the ministry. This is the plan made by the judiciary. So you need infrastructure. The government has been mandated to create shelter, to hire more staff and veterinary doctors. Medical care, capture and remove, Delhi NCR localities, no release back. Permanent housing. So please go and read what Supreme Court has specified in this particular order that the Delhi government is mandated to do. So it is clear that if the government does not follows on this order, a strong contempt will be taken, and which leaves the Delhi government with no other option but to follow through. This has been severely criticized by a section of the society. One section talks about the practical problems of this kind of an order. Infra shortfall. They say that there are around minimum 5 to 6 lakh, and there are estimates which say around 10 lakh stray dogs in our country. It might surprise you, but Delhi government has zero stray dog centers. There are stray dog centers, but they are not government stray dog centers. So the government right now owns no facility to house these lakhs of dogs. That is number one problem. And when we take into account all the privately owned, they can house at max, stretching them to their capacity 10,000. It is impossible to create such a massive infrastructure facility in such a short span of time. It is just impossible. Then there are second category of people who question this decision not on the grounds of infrastructure, but they question this policy on the grounds of the sustainability of the ecosystem. According to them, just like in nature, keystone species is important. Stray dog happens to be that key link in the chain, which is taken out, the chain will break down. Maneka Gandhi happens to be one of them, who shows that this was tried at a place which, as soon as the dogs were successfully removed out of streets, immediately saw a rapid, massive increase in the population of rodents like rats, which resulted into own sets of problems. At least right now, you worry about dogs, which you can see. Once you remove the dogs from the streets, you will have booming rodent population. And once you will have booming rodent population, you will have problems that you will not be able to find short-term solutions, just like uh, removing the dogs from the streets. These are the problems that have been highlighted. Now, the larger problem that has set the discourse is Supreme Court entering into areas of decision making, policy making, acting like policymaker. And that's where we really question whether judiciary is really activating itself in judicial activism or whether it is really overreach. Because uh, whether the dog should be on streets or not, and if they should not be on streets justifiable according to some constitutional provision, then what should be the process of the removal of the stray dog is something for the executive and the parliament to arrive at the solution. Judiciary is not the arena for such discussion, because eventually this whole policy will be effectuated, will be implemented by the executive, and executive here through top down approach is fed a particular policy option. The executive is not allowed to choose from multiple policy options. Executive is being asked to implement a policy which has been framed under the Supreme Court. And most people say that earlier, whenever Supreme Court has tried to venture into such policy making areas, for example, you can look at environmental problems. Supreme Court has been taking environment seriously for last 25-30 years. Do you really think environmental problems have gone away? Do you think Delhi is cleaner as compared to what it was 20 years ago? Do you think the river Ganga has become cleaner as compared to earlier? So all these sorts of problems uh, are ignored. So what I am expecting is in next week, within next week, we will have more and more editorials basing this particular judgment to criticize the functioning of the Supreme Court, and that's when we will have more discussion. But right now, it will be tangential to this core topic. Next topic is a very interesting topic where RBI prescribes 7 sutras for AI adoption in financial sector. A very interesting article where RBI has come up with a report where RBI has very comprehensively dealt with how AI can be a very useful tool in financial sector and what are the challenges that AI has to offer. If you go to an IS Anantam website, you can see that this article is there. You can read it in detail. Let me explain it to you in a very succinct manner. So, what are the possibilities that AI offers in financial sector? Let's look at the possibilities. According to RBI, if AI is integrated well into our system, it has the potential to completely alter the customer experience. Number one, what is customer experience? So, for example, when you, I think all of us have now started feeling that customer care center are just a sham. No one picks up your call because probably the financial institutions do not have the capacity or they do not have the intent to hire professionals to cater to, just one second, to cater to the needs of, to cater to the needs of the customers. Whenever I have tried to call, I have not gotten any kind of positive response, and it is just an automated response for English press 1, for Hindi press 2. Then when you go to English or Hindi, then it's just automated IVRS responses. RBI says that AI can completely replace customer care experience because of its neural networks. It can come up with responses which can be human like and which can cater to the specific problem that a consumer is facing. At the same time, some of the most automated jobs can be replaced, like data maintenance can be replaced, reducing the costs of operations, reducing the cost and increasing the profits for the financial sector. So that is something that is taken as a opportunity. At the same time, financial sector face problem in trying to assess their risk. Risk assessment is one of the, it's not one of the, it's the most important portfolio. It's one of the most important functioning areas for any kind of financial sector. Banks have to constantly be vigilant about the assets when they are turning non-profit. That is a risk assessment. The credit card companies have to see when a person stops paying the bills. The bond market has to be vigilant about the performance of the corporate. All of that can become extremely easy if AI is utilized well, because AI, because of its deep learning models, can identify the early warning systems. Might not take the decision as good as human as of now, but at least make the human aware. So that's what it said, that AI will not replace human. A human using AI will replace a human not using an AI. So AI can be a very good tool for proper risk assessment, which can go a long way in enabling the financial sector to take better decision. For example, identifying credit worthiness of a person, identifying trends in the CIBIL score, these sort of things. uh, what RBI says, that if AI is linked with DPI, digital personal information, for example UPI and Aadhaar, AI can learn a lot of valuable lesson which probably is impossible for a group of humans or a particular human to, and they can give insights. So these are the ways in which uh, we can use AI in the financial sector. But then, obviously, everything just like is a bane is equally a boon, is a boon is equally a bane, and so there are a lot of problems for which people have to be extremely vigilant about. Number one thing is that AI, because it learns on human created data, it carries forward the biases, the stigmas, the stereotypes that the humans hold. So when AI model is fed a particular data, if that data itself is biased, has stereotypes, has some human error, that will be carried forward. And that's the problem that you cannot allow in a financial sector model. Also, AI is plagued with the problem of black box. What algorithms they follow, why a particular AI model gives a particular result, why models differ in terms of their operability is not known to anyone. Because AI is a self learning model, we do not have a clear cut prediction as to how a particular input, the same input given by two AI users, results in two very different kinds of outputs. And this is something you can also do. You can keep you and your friends laptops and phones together, and you can type the exactly same question. You will see that the results will be drastically different. Probably the people at OpenAI will fail to explain as to why there is so much of difference um, in in the responses, and that is when it will be integrated with the financial sector will become even more problematic. When AI will be deeply entrenched with the financial sector, we will face the problem of cascading effects. Cascading effect, because when AI becomes deeply entrenched with the financial sector, when AI algorithms are incorporated into the financial algorithms, as of now, which generally do not contain AI, the data, the algorithm, or you can see the calibration of that data will become important. At the same time, because the banking sector or any other financial sector will not have the capacity to include or incorporate AI, that will be outsourced. And now you can see the problem that if it will be outsourced, you are including one more risk factor into your system. So if you see a particular model that works well with the financial data, you will say, okay, we need your model and please depute few people so that they can help us integrate this model into our financial system. As and when that happens, you have already outsourced and you have become really reliant on a third party. The integrity of that third party will now determine the functioning of the financial sector, which can be compromising in certain situations. So, in these ways, RBI has very beautifully, you can go to IS Anantam website and read this detailed article. Uh, Now, this is the last article for our discussion, which is what is the difference between civil and criminal cases. This is an article which has appeared in Indian Express today itself, and this is something that I explain in the foundation classes. Also, something that is very important for us to understand as a UPSC aspirant. UPSC has of late started asking question on criminal law. The UPSC has asked question on bail provision. UPSC has asked question on arrest, detention, parole, furlough. And so, to begin with, it is very important for us to be able to make that distinction as to how and why a particular crime or offense can be categorized as civic offense, or what is a civic offense and what is a criminal offense. So, every particular state has the authority to determine interaction between people as civic and criminal, and it keeps on changing with time. As the state evolves, as the society changes, as the judiciary changes, the perception of criminality and civility changes. The best example of how these transformation can be extremely smooth and fluid is before 2018. Homosexuality was a crime in our country. After 2018, it stopped being a crime in our country. That's how fragile this distinction is. So, whatever is laid down by the law as a criminal offense becomes a criminal offense. Whatever is laid down as a civil offense is a civil offense. It is as simple as that. So, whatever is defined in Bharati Nyaya Sanghita as a criminal offense is a criminal offense, and then rest everything is a civic offense as defined in uh, civic procedure code. Now, however, after the definition has been laid out, the rest of the things can be differentiated. Generally, individual wrongs are taken as civic offenses, whereas the wrongs against the society or the state are considered as criminal offenses, like rape and murder. If a person has committed a murder or a rape, it is for the entire society to hold that person responsible. But if there is a problem, let's say if there is a problem of property dispute between two brothers or one brother and one sister, that is not a problem which should bother the state or the rest of the society. So this is a civic offense. Now, the because the offense of criminal nature is an offense against the entire society or the state, it is the responsibility of the state to hold the person accountable, and that is why in every criminal case, state appoints a prosecutor, a lawyer. Whereas in civic offenses, it is one person who takes the matter to the court, and after that, it basically is called upon by the other person, plaintiff. In cases of criminal nature, the penalty generally is punishment is in the form of jail term. In case of civic offenses, it is not a jail term, it is financial or any kind of particular outcome. For example, if it is a divorce matter, divorce is an outcome, or not a divorce is an outcome. Custody of children is an outcome. In case of criminal nature, most of the criminal cases end up either in incarceration or penalty or both, depending upon which crime it is. It can also end into death sentence in case of heinous crimes, rarest of the rare cases. So this is the subtle distinction between the uh, criminal and civic offense. Rest of the articles you can go and read. Let me quickly cover the other important articles. So, derivatives market in India. This was published late, so we will cover it on Monday's edition. Uh, Derivatives are basically those kinds of financial instruments which derive their value from some other aspect, from some other quantity or commodity, not on themselves. So they do not have their own intrinsic value, like shares do not have something of themselves. So this is something, this article we have discussed. Now, this is the article, what is the difference between civil and criminal cases. So you can see the questions have been asked with respect to this topic. In the civil law regulates dispute between individual groups, purpose to protect rights, enforce duties. Whereas in criminal cases, so you can see the purpose is to punish offense against state and society. Parties are plaintiff and defendant. Here it is state versus accused. It is compensation, injunction, enforcement of right is punishment, fine, imprisonment, death penalty. So please go through this article. Then there is an article on HIV/AIDS. So this editorial in The Hindu yesterday on 15th of August said that should HIV/AIDS testing be made mandatory before the marriage? And this is specifically because Meghalaya has become the second state after Goa to just one second, to make it mandatory. Instead of DNS now, would you be doing having this? Yeah, we have been doing this in last for 3 weeks. We go live thrice every week and cover the important articles, and rest of the articles are published in the form of text which you can read easily. So, and so the editorial discussed two sides of the argument against mandatory testing. There is a legal barrier against testing because HIV/AIDS Prevention and Control Act 2017 requires counseling, consent, and confidentiality, and This will be violated if you force every married couple to go through HIV testing first. Obviously, there is a scientific basis. There is now a very good treatment available, which is anti-retroviral therapy, where the viral load within 2 to 3 months of the initiation of the treatment becomes undetectable and untransmittable W. Hence, HIV positive individuals on ART can marry and live healthy lives without risk of transmission. So the stigma with the HIV/AIDS is basically because of the two main sources from which it is acquired. Number one is drug use, and the second one is unprotected intercourse. And that is why it has become such a big issue. So, argument for mandatory testing is ground reality in practice. Doctors already often test without consent. Better to regulate for whichever medical procedure you go to any kind of medical institution. The first thing is automated HIV test. It will lead to the protection of families. Many cases of hidden HIV status, especially in Northeast, were drug use prevention. And we have also went on to explain what is ART, which was not the main reason or main article, but it is an important way. It is an important technology to be understood, and that's why we integrated that into the articles. A national policy with region specific implementation strategies, what can lead to, can end the grave damage being caused by the invasive aquatic plant that name is uh, this is water hyacinth. This is an invasive alien species. I don't think there is anyone who is watching or will watch this video has not seen a scene like, has not seen something like this. Whenever you see a water body, usually you see it covered with the same plant, and it is not indigenous to India. It is an invasive species. You can see which of the following is an question on environment with respect to species interaction has been asked. So what is water hyacinth? uh, it is an invasive plant. Invasive means that a particular species which has the ability to dominate over local ecosystem, and it could be because of various reasons. It could be because of some special unique features. It could be because of very high reproductive rate. It could be better adaptability. It could be because of the predatory skills. It could be because of various reasons. So it is native to tropical and subtropical South America. From there it ended up into domestic waters, and it yields lavender blue flowers. It looks beautiful. It can reproduce both sexually, where seeds, and asexually, vegetative means. Impact on Kerala agriculture: it has impacted agriculture. It has impacted fishing. Fishermen are also severely affected as the dense mats destroy fish nurseries. It impacts biodiversity and ecosystem. So what are the solutions? Converting water hyacinth plant into a resource. So you can see, you can read this. Alien species and alien species, subspecies or lower taxon introduced outside its natural past or present distribution, which includes any part gamete seeds. Invasive means directly refers to an alien species whose introduction spread threatens the biodiversity. What are the other invasive alien species in our country? Lantana camara. Now it has been used. It is being used as a hedge. Parthenium, Congress grass, because of this its widespread nature. Mesquite, Prosopis julifera. You can see Mexican devil, alligator weed, American bullfrog, and then crow is an invasive species outside Indian subcontinent. So it's just not we are the impacted country, we also have contributed alien species across the globe. So this is it for today. We will meet on Monday for the news articles on Saturday, Sunday and Monday. So stay tuned on our channel for such updates. If you are comfortable with Hindi, then you can subscribe to IS Anantam Hindi channel. Thank you. Good night.